Hello, welcome to yet another episode of Animation Dissection, the show that takes the joy of cartoons, removes said joy, and vivisects it for science, or a class of bored high school biology students. Either way, it's happening and you're listening to it. So today we are talking about a turn-of-the-century cartoon, Mission Hill. I am joined today by Zorak.
Hi.
And special guest, Tears.
Hello.
And, of course, your host, Neeksy, also known as Ryan Magnuson. So, I think we should probably start off by talking about the background of Mission Hill. It was originally created by Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein, who were Simpsons showrunners, and they were in charge of the seasons near the end of what some fans kind of refer to as its, like, golden age. They made a lot of episodes like Lisa the Vegetarian, a lot of the shows that kind of had a very family-centric plot lines and had kind of a bit of heart to them, as well as like the humor. They liked making fun of oldie time things quite a bit, so they kind of informed a lot of like Mr. Burns's dialogue and his references and things like that. That was something they were always very interested in, or at least they found funny. This show was very ill-fated, though. It originally aired in 1999 and then through 2000, but it was originally only broadcast on the WB, of all places, for 2 episodes, when it was then promptly taken off the air because of very poor ratings. And then the network waited until, I think, the summer of 2000 and only showed 4 more episodes in what a lot of people kind of refer to as a burn-off. So, like, a lot of TV shows that are either premiering or having episodes delayed till summer, usually the network is just either not confident in what they did or just really... we paid for it, so we're just going to burn off the episodes. And I would say that this show was kind of like one of the many, many victims of the TV animation massacre. So this was in the same relative time period when the WB was doing a lot of animated sitcoms. This included the adaptation of Baby Blues, the comic strip. They did The Oblongs and The PJs. And that was all in the WB itself. And then on the other networks, they did God, the Devil, and Bob, Dilbert, things like that. They were all trying to do these kind of show launches, and they all just bombed almost immediately. It was kind of a terrible time. And actually, the show itself made a whole joke about it, where I think Andy makes a joke about it, like, oh, everyone and their brother has an animated sitcom now, or something like that. So it was kind of aware of that fact. It really only became a cult status hit because of the revival on places like Teletoon in Canada, and very famously Cartoon Network's Adult Swim lineup.
That seems to happen a lot.
Yes, so that is, and unfortunately, unlike, well, depending on whether you like the show or not, it did not get another season made because it was too long since the original people were together to make it, whereas shows like Family Guy and Futurama were able to get extra seasons because they did so well on Adult Swim and things like that. So the visual designer, I think this is one of the more interesting people behind it, was Lauren McMullen, and she was previously like a director on The Critic, and later directed a lot of episodes of King of the Hill. More recently, though, she worked on Avatar: The Last Airbender and Wreck-It Ralph, and she directed...
Both of which look nothing like Mission Hill, I might say.
No, but she seems very good at what she does, because she also directed Disney's very recent theatrical short, that 2D, 3D combo, Get a Horse.
Ah.
So, and again, it's just really interesting because the show has a very distinct visual style, and it doesn't look like anything else she's worked on. It kind of reminds me of, Mackey's, the Drinky the Crow.
Yeah.
And Evan Dorkin's work. I think Evan Dorkin's work, especially kind of as a cultural icon of that time period.
It does. It definitely
the underground comics scene.
It definitely has a very kind of a gross kind of aesthetic to it, and like in a good way, mind you. It's just
like the indie comic scene, thick outlines, kind of jelly bean kind of shaped people, things like that.
I always felt like it felt more like you were watching a comic book than a cartoon show.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. It's got just that more physical feel to the art.
It's got
Well,
the heavy
it's-
the color palette really is along that
yeah.
line too.
Well,
Like, it
it's
feels like a
interesting that you
newspaper.
mentioned that because this show was one of the very last to actually use original cell and cell paint. And a lot of the color choices they made was because they knew that the cell paints would look a certain way when actually photographed, that a lot of the computers, it was kind of harder to come up with that palette at the time. And I think even now, there's no show that would be willing to take that risk. I mean, no one would think to make a Simpsons palette these days. So it was very adventurous, and I thought it was just a very interesting visual style. I think that's what I think that's one of the main things that differentiated it a lot from all the other cartoons that were attempted at the time. You know, like when you're looking at Baby Blues and Oblongs and all these other ones, they didn't have that type of adventurousness with color and design.
Well, with Oblongs, at least you can at least compare in the sense that it definitely keeps kind of a similar aesthetic in the sense of that it's gross kind of looking characters. Everybody looks kind of hideous. Mission Hill kind of has an aesthetic of that as well.
Well, the Oblongs was based off of an underground comic thing called Creepy Susie. So these do have
Okay, I've never heard
that
of that.
inspiration from this artistic movement in the underground comic scene in that time period. I mean, it was...
It does still do its own thing, though, with it was willing to put those characters on television, because they're awful-looking characters, but
Yeah.
it was pushing forward in that way.
Oh, man.
Whereas
I guess I would
think
call
Mission
it Ugly
Hill was
Beautiful.
going more with the art.
Oh man, what if we
Yeah.
ever got like a Rat Fink cartoon? I'm just thinking of what that would be like. That would be hideous.
Well, they had Capital Critters, that one where
Oh.
they start off that show with the mass gassing of the main character's family.
Just shut
and
up
friends.
about that. Just shut up.
All right. So that's the basic kind of background of the show overall. Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein have since moved on to Futurama, and I think one of them works on Portlandia, and the other one's on a British children's show. So they have gone on to pretty good careers, and they worked on, again, Futurama, which is, very beloved, I think, by a lot of people.
I think it's funny that you mentioned Weinstein's penchant for the going with the oldie-timey jokes, because in the Futurama commentary, I think it was David X. Cohen that pointed at a joke that was making fun of like a phonograph or something. Like, that's a Weinstein joke, isn't it? And they're like,
Oh, yeah. Very much. I mean,
because it's just his thing where he just loves old stuff like that.
yeah. I mean, again, look at their time when they were running The Simpsons, and you look at all
Yeah.
those Mr. Burns episodes they did, and
Yep.
God, they love that. And you know what? Frankly, I love it too. I think it's charming. It's very.
I think there's some of the better ways to use Mr. Burns is to just have him stuck in the 1920s
Yes, exactly.
As
I think
instead
that
of
makes
trying
them
to
funny.
deal with something.
As someone who really enjoys just looking at like the Twitter account where they're just tweeting entries from old newspapers, I can also appreciate
Yes.
that kind of thing.
Yep.
Well,
I agree.
I think even Mission Hill has that kind of. Yes, it was definitely a portrait of a generation that has since kind of passed its prime
Mm-hmm.
as the kind of zeitgeist of young people. But I think it was actually a pretty accurate portrayal of kind of like that cusp of the Generation X type of
Yep.
people as they were transitioning towards selling out and
Well,
things like
and
that.
I am right at the age. I think it really resonated with me because I'm only a couple years younger than Andy was, and so I got to see the end level of Generation X dealing with the fact that it was changing, and a lot of them weren't old enough to have really been Gen X. They were just lumped in with this group that they didn't connect with real well. And
Yeah.
then dealing with the fact that the world had moved on, and the Gen X ideas that they spent middle school being like, oh, this is how you do it. Those guys moved on. There's a really good episode where he discovers that everyone that's a couple years older than me are executives.
Or the people his
because-
own age, they all sold
Or yeah,
out.
some of them, because they just realized, oh, it's great to have this like anti-consumerist attitude, but you have to make money and you have to live. And he's just been kind of hanging out in an apartment with his friend, and then his friend's an executive, and it's like, oh, oops, I missed that boat. And I can really get in with that because I kind of did the same thing in my childhood. I'm a little bit behind a lot of my peers on this whole like becoming a business person, because I also did the hang out for a few years and not worry about it, and then life happens.
Yeah,
So it does resonate.
Well, I think Andy's problem was also is that he chose to be an artist in a society that, especially back then, I mean, yes, they were kind of being picked up for a lot of TV shows as he was kind of making fun of, but it's not a place where a lot of people make money. It's not a stable career path, and at the same time, he has to, do a job at this awful waterbed store.
And
like everything.
It doesn't help that on top of that, he's a massive slacker.
Well, that and his comics are also oddly, for the character who's this kind of slobby person, they're oddly highbrow and very obtuse kind of jokes.
Yeah,
it's weird. It's actually kind of weird writing in that sense, because he's not that intellectually high, but he has an art art understanding that belies him.
Yeah,
and it really is that generation. A lot of them were. And even I can say that I'm part of this, very highly educated in like a laser like scalpel focus in one direction, but not rounded enough to be able to use that in any other way than he made this art that no one could connect to because it was laser focused into like Dada and a highbrow philosophy, but it's a comic strip. So
he's oddly a kind of ahead of his time, because that type of stuff is the stuff that's viral now. That type of slight intellectual bent, but this obtuseness to it. I mean, he would work better in the modern distribution. But overall, though, like getting too far into it, he chose a profession that is not a profitable one for a lot of people, and he's of course a slacker, and he kind of decided that he was just going to kind of sleepwalk his way through life. I mean, and he was working at that awful bed. The only reason he quit that job at the bed store is because it got shut down. Any move he had made to kind of improve his life was merely incidental or crisis focused and things like that.
Well, and he also, I think there was an episode where he was offered to do ads, but he didn't want to do it because he felt it was beneath him as an artist.
Well, it's actually interesting in general.
It's that sort of thing.
They have this focus a lot. Well, a lot of the episodes are focused on the marketing towards that generation, that sort of thing, and just like how that generation intersects with business and whatnot, where they produce things that are meant to be built around and aimed at, like when the very first episodes, I believe, was where they had the thing with the MTV.
Yes, that's a great one.
Where they're just them, it's kind of that sort of generation aimed at, and he doesn't really take advantage of that aspect. Meanwhile, Jim is part of a profession he's the entire reason why he's so, not only is he intelligent and skilled, but also because he's got this insight into that generation and the upcoming generation,
basically to exploit his own generation.
Right.
I mean, he's there because he's like, oh, we want to mine that brain of yours, Jim. And then you see the result of that in the MTV real world type of things. And it's funny because I think a lot of the characters have this pretension about them where they think they're kind of above it all in this type of marketing, but at the same time, they are just as shaped by it as everybody else.
Oh, they're all consumers in it.
Yes, and that's what makes it kind of funny. There's that inherent hypocrisy in the way this show looks at Generation X, this one that is very willing to rebel and hangs its Kurt Cobain around its neck like an albatross, but without realizing what he was kind of rebelling against and how much his own music was then used by that very same machine, et cetera, et cetera. I think also one of the other characters that's very interesting in how he's kind of the opposite but oddly the same is his brother Kevin. So Kevin is kind of he's almost kind of like he's like a throwback from the 80s to some extent in terms of personality, in the sense that he's very upwardly mobile focused. Like he's very me. But he is a product of, I think, the generation that I'm a part of as well, where it was from elementary school on, you're thinking about college. Everybody's telling you, you have to go to the right college, et cetera, et cetera. And I think he was only, maybe a few years older than me by the time that show was originally airing. So I was definitely in that environment. There was college guides. There was like millions of test prep things. Of course, eventually 2008 happens and the whole system turns out to be a sham. But for a lot of us, we very much believed that our entire future was determined exactly by which college accepted you. And Kevin is very much shaped like that. shaped by that type of society. And of course, he also has his own issues. His parents not wanting to talk to him about the real world at all. I mean, he doesn't understand like basic facts of sex or just puberty or anything like that. So he's extremely sheltered. His parents spoiled him to death, and now he's suddenly set into this like inner city environment to live with his very kind of hipster older brother and things like that. So it's kind of the character, I think, that has to adjust. Well, I think both of the main characters, the brothers, it's about adaptation and adjusting and change. I think Posey and Jim, they've kind of found their thing. They're kind of the oddly most stable characters, despite being kind of the least developed and
the weirdos.
The weirdos, and they're the ones that have found their place. It's these two brothers, the younger one who's considered supposed to be responsible, but is oddly at the same time extremely naive. You know, he's book smart, has no experience with the real world at all. And the older brother who's kind of thinks he knows everything and seems like he's secure, only to have his entire life shattered and then reconstructed, then shattered and reconstructed constantly. By things outside of his control.
Well, and I think that it hits it. It's really a story. The story focuses on the growth of those two characters. Kevin has to grow up and discover the world, and his brother needs to realize that there are other people than him, and he needs to do more with his life than kind of hang out and complain that nobody understands his comics.
Yeah, it's a sense of responsibility.
And also his personal relationships. He has to do more than just, like, it's not high school anymore. You have to actually put in effort and be there for people.
Yeah. It's actually interesting how unlikable both of them really are, at least early on.
Yeah.
Like in the first episode, they're both like, Jesus Christ, you're both just obnoxious. Especially Kevin, who is deliberately by design made to be the obnoxious nerd. But
I think that's that's actually one of the flaws I think that the show had. This is a show where you're better off watching it twice, because the first time through they are really hard to like, but then after you watch it the first time, you can go back and see why the choices were made, and then you can be like, okay, I get it. But that isn't always great for a show, because a lot of times those first two episodes are how you get people in, and they're hard to even empathize with in those first two episodes.
Well, they don't put in a lot of relatable moments or any real sort of like some like emotional moments that, the feel good moments that are really cheap and lazy, but at least they make you like, oh, well, this character, I can kind of understand it. Especially since the cast, in general, they went for a cast that's atypical, which is great. The cast as a whole, the reoccurring cast at least, are pretty atypical characters, and that's interesting.
I don't think they really are. I think they're atypical on television.
Well, that's
but
what
I think when you really think about it, I think the reason the cast works so well is we know all these people.
Oh yeah.
Like, everyone has these people in their life. They might not be a one-for-one match, but every character has an analog in my life somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, I think overall,
I understand that. And I think that worked for the show, because too many shows are like, just make every other character so bland that it's like, they could be anyone, but you can't, like, attach someone to them.
Sure.
Yeah, I think what I call that is just characters that are well observed. They don't have to have an analog to someone who's real, but they have to kind of be recognizable to someone's experience. I mean, and I think this show does a very good job of it. I think that's what gives it that cult status, and why a lot of people associate with it. They might not like some of the characters, but they recognize them. They understand, like, oh, these people actually do exist. Their decisions make sense in terms of their personalities, and you might think they have a horrible personality. I think what I like about Kevin's character, even though I don't like him as a person, is that he's almost kind of like the rebuttal to the kind of the trope where, oh, well, the geek characters are often the kind nerds who are just abused for no reason by the jocks. It's like, well, no, it turns out that he's not actually that nice of a guy. I mean, he's just as awful as the people that he kind of claims are dumber than him or more brutal than him, like the jocks or the bullies and things like that. No, he's just as bad. So it's just kind of the self-pitying thing aspect to it. Like, I think when he plays that MMO game and he sells off his friend to, like, the slave traders or something like that, I mean, he's just as awful and opportunistic. I mean, he dates that girl just to try to get a recommendation letter from her insane dad who builds, like, death weapons for the army or something like that.
Hey, that was the man who named the Earl Meyer flask.
Yes. That they definitely that was what they really got to unleash their oldie time stuff with him.
Yeah.
That was pretty funny.
And I that's one of those things where one of my friends in school was Kevin, and he was exactly like that. Like, all of his troubles he brought on himself because he was a terrible person.
Oh yeah,
But
everybody knows people
had this
like
thing
that.
everybody always picks on me. It's like, no, you did it to yourself. And yeah, it's great writing for him that they show that.
Yeah,
They
because
show
again,
that he is his own problem.
yeah, and because again, so many shows, I think, because a lot of the people who write them are somewhat nerdy, they kind of cast it as this dichotomy of good, bad, pure, defiled, with nerds versus the other children, more popular people. And I think that's why I like this, is that no, they show that like the other people aren't all that great either, but it also shows equal measure that geeks aren't always nice guys. Like, it's that whole nice guy trope where people like to think of themselves as being on the moral high ground. And that others are just senseless, whereas he himself, no, he's just like them in a lot of ways. He just refuses to admit it. Like he calls Andy, his favorite word to call Andy and other people is perverted. And that was kind of that was a great episode turn, was when he sneaks off into the mini mart bathroom with a porn magazine and accidentally burns it down, and in a trial Andy has to make everybody else admit, like, oh no, everyone looks at porn and is perverted and things like that. It's just that no one wants to admit it. And really who he's telling this to is Kevin. I mean, yes, the audience and the people in the trial are there, but the lesson should be to someone like Kevin, who has very strange hang-ups about human sexuality, and he projects that anger and frustration onto everybody else around him, calling them perverts and things like that. So again, interesting character. I think there's a lot of depth to these characters and the weird complexes they have. And again, I think that's a product that you see of Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein. I mean, again, when you look at their Simpsons episodes, the character of like Lisa, Homer, and all that, they had a lot more, I think, kind of emotional depth to them than kind of what they had transitioned to much later, where they just became kind of mouthpieces for jokes rather than like, okay, they have hopes and dreams and there's conflict because of that, etc.
Well, after a time with The Simpsons, they kind of just become tropes rather than characters to a degree.
Yes.
They're the archetype, and that's it.
Yeah, and it's kind of cool is if you listen to the commentary on the DVD, which was released way back in 2005, so good luck trying to find it these days. But the commentary tracks, they talk about how when they originally planned the series, they actually planned out in their heads kind of like an outline for 10 seasons where the characters change jobs and where they kind of go. So they actually looked at it not as a kind of stationary status quo sitcom. They actually wanted to show these characters change and progress over time. So you can kind of see why maybe when it starts out, these characters are they're really not good people yet, because I think the show was about them maybe becoming better people. Yeah, and that might be its downfall at the same time.
Yeah, that's an interesting
you have
approach
to catch
to take,
people.
But that can hurt you.
Yes, and I think that's maybe what happened to the show.
I'm going to break in here for just a moment, let you know it is super available on Amazon.
Oh, good.
Buy it.
Good, yes.
I'm seeing 45 regular offers and like 8 of them from Amazon itself. So
good. So it's still in circulation.
Yeah, it's still in circulation.
Just don't expect to go down to Best Buy and find it.
No, you're never going to find it there. You'll have to go through Amazon. But.
Yeah. And I think you can also find it on certain streaming things, but if you want commentary and other things like that, there's actually episodes that were never produced, but they have the script and animatic for. You can look at them online. You can actually even download the scripts for some of the unaired episodes, which were very interesting, I think. So, but we don't want to get too much into that because I don't think everyone here has read or watched them. So we'll just talk about what was produced.
Zorak. Oh, go by all means. You two could go ahead with it. I didn't do that.
No. It's fine. I think
it's not really necessary. Yeah, because
does anything really interesting happen in them? Like, is there anything like astounding?
The only one that's really interesting.
There's a career thing with Andy
and
Jim.
One of them,
a good conflict.
One of the animatic episodes deals with his relationship. Because remember, that never gets solidified in the show, but the animatic one was written to actually make him grow up and realize that if he doesn't put effort into this, he's going to lose this really cool girl that honestly is like perfect for him.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty good one. That's like, I think one of my it wasn't even made, and I think it's one of my favorite episodes.
Well, and again, they also have an episode with a conflict between Andy and Jim, and I think that fleshes
Yeah.
out Jim pretty well. It exposes
Yeah.
like a little bit of his flaws as well. Because I mean, as you know, the episodes that were made, Jim is kind of like, you don't see flaws with him. I mean, yes, he acts weird and he's kind of out of it, but the show never really considers that a flaw. It's the show never looks at him and says, "Well, this guy's a screw up by any means." So
Yeah,
he's just
kind of
seems
the
like this
savior
cool
in
guy,
most
yeah,
episodes.
or the sage.
Yeah.
You know, he's
or
this
the
kind of
sage,
sage-like
yeah,
character.
He kind of wanders in and gives wisdom, and then wanders back out, and it's like, because they just didn't go long enough to start digging into his character all that much.
He
Yeah.
does come
Which is
across
just
though as
sad.
the most interesting character in the sense that he's just likable. He's
Also because he's mysterious.
that
You,
too.
you,
Yeah.
you don't really get to see inside of his head, and that's what makes, I think, that very interesting. And I think some of the other characters, though, I think one of my favorite ones are the neighbors, Gus and Wally.
They are my favorite characters.
The gay couple that are in
Yeah.
their 60s, they're old men, and again, this show
That's
having
actually
that
really
being portrayed
audacious
on
for the
TV
time, yeah.
in 2000.
Yeah,
yes,
it was
It actually got a
surprising.
GLAAD award for some of the stuff they did, and I think the final episode they made is one, I think, the most beautiful episodes, where it's kind of it's a little bit of a throwback to Plan 9 from Outer Space, but
It's a spoof on it.
it's a spoof on it, but it does it in such a heartfelt way. It's so funny. There's great jokes, but it doesn't sacrifice the characters for those
and
jokes.
I think one of the reasons that I love Mission Hill and I love those characters is them being gay is never the joke.
No, it's actually people's reactions to it.
It's
that
either
defines.
people's reaction to it or just the way that because they are also kind of an odd couple joke as well. And because one of them is neat freak, and
Nebbish.
and then the other one,
Yeah.
and the other one is just doesn't kind of care. I mean, he came home one day with a knife in his head and was like, it'll be fine. Quit pestering
don't
me.
worry about it. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, it's always
and
the
so
focus
they-
more on the
they-
actual characters and their interactions rather than their sexuality in and of itself.
No, and that's the great part of it. Like them being gay is not ever the joke. It's them being an old married couple is the joke, and that's perfect.
Yeah.
And it's very well done, and I love them for that because it was amazing to see at that time period.
Yeah, it's certainly audacious.
And
for
just
the
in
time.
general, like even these days, when you see like the way a lot of people are portrayed on TV from either one race or one sexuality or another, it's often very tropey. They're kind of just a stand-in for a larger group of people. It's often an excuse to get out of having to write good characters. And I think this show, I mean, whether or not you ended up enjoying it or not, I think it has good examples of character writing where the characters' decisions make sense. The jokes kind of arise very naturally out of those interactions. It's not just trying to come up with a wacky situation for them to deal with. It's often the consequence of these characters' decisions and actions.
Yep.
And that's what I really like about it. And I think that's what gives it a lot of gives me a lot of hope for maybe not hope. I guess I mean, it's something I think a lot of people should probably watch if they're interested in doing character-driven humor. I think because there's not a lot of that in the animated sitcoms right now. There's just very little of that. You're not going to find it in modern day Simpsons. You're definitely not going to find that in Family Guy. There's very little to no character based humor on that show.
Well, yeah, because Family Guy is all just reference. You remember this?
Yeah. So
well, with Mission Hill though, like there's some some of the episodes though are really kind of just narrow and just kind of generic. Like you have these interesting characters, but the plots often are pretty. I mean, be a bit more critical and negative. Though. Like there are some of these episodes that are a lot of them are focused on like, oh, Andy really wants to fuck. Andy wants to fuck this chick. What's gonna happen with this? And it's basically just like that's like 3-4 of the episodes of like the 12 that are in existence.
The PTA episode, I think, is one of the big ones there.
The one where they want to, where both him and Kevin want to fuck George's sister.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of interesting, settings around it, like that. The fact that it's the whole she is a nerd and it's like a sci-fi con type thing. That like the setting and what the approach they take it is interesting, but it's still kind of like they do a lot of really generic.
Well,
plots
the motivation is the same, and I think a lot of sitcoms and a lot of animated sitcoms suffer from the fact that sitcom tropes are very well established. It's like, honey,
It's-
my boss is coming over for dinner. Uh-oh, the pot roast is burnt. It's
Well, and
that's such a
it's
common
very,
thing.
very easy to write a 20-something man getting in trouble when his penis is thinking for him.
True,
Yeah, I mean,
but
that's such a common
I mean,
thing.
I know that that's like, and I'm not saying that excuses it. That's why they were doing it. I can also say that because of those animatic episodes, they were trying to inlay that he's scared of commitment.
Yeah.
But because the show never got to go that far, they're stuck being judged by what they were able to do. So yes, several of the episodes are, oh look, Andy's on the prowl again. So it ends up that you kind of have to watch that sometimes and maybe meter it out a little bit more.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it does get hard to kind of judge to the show in the sense like, well, they didn't really get much to demonstrate.
Yeah.
You know what they could do with it, so it's hard to get too negative. I mean, if you just judged The Simpsons, for example, off like the first 13 episodes, you would have a completely different takeaway if you judge it off of the good seasons or all the good seasons and then the bad seasons.
Yeah.
It seldom
Well,
is a
yeah,
show
absolutely.
really that fantastic in the first 13 episodes. That really come to shine, and you're like, oh my god,
Yep.
this is great. Or where it can be flawless, and usually if you can get like a good feel out of it, like Mission Hill has certainly got a lot of interesting aspects to it. That's impressive. Yeah.
I think the show is definitely a victim of ambition. I mean, they had the whole
Yes.
10-season planned out thing. They spent a long time. They actually developed like what the city looks like, and they came up with bar names and bands, and they did a lot of world building on this thing. And unfortunately, I think it conflicts with the way television is produced and the way seasons are meted out and the way audiences get to know these things. I mean, it almost works much better as a show that you can watch all in one sitting than it would have been if you had to wait from episode to episode and you have to make that decision in the week. Do I want to spend time with these characters again? And I think because it was like, well, we want to present these characters as kind of very rough people that are being shaped up by their experiences and time over the course of the series, you have to be able to hook people right away, because otherwise the networks are just going to cancel you. The networks are not going to give you the chance these days and say, well, this has potential. That doesn't really, very rarely, there's only a few times, like Cheers, for example, which it debuted pretty terribly, and the person in charge of the network said, well, this show we believe in, we have faith in that'll do better. They gave them that chance. That's so rare. Taking your gamble on, no, we're going for something very ambitious. We're going to develop things over time. It's just it's practically suicide. And I think that was one of the big problems in this show. Is it was also having, I think it needed more time to be able to find its voice, or at least a kind of a happy rut. I mean, I don't want to say rut in a bad way, but kind of like when a show finds its voice and is able to coast along for a while, the audiences have their expectations set for it. Like they know when they're going to sit down and watch an episode that week, kind of what they're expecting. It's like when you sit down for an episode of Parks and Recreation or something like that, you kind of have a decent idea of what you're getting. You might get surprised by a few things, but overall you have like a good set of expectations and it's reliable. I think this show had a lot of difficulty trying to find its voice, and I think it wasn't until much later that it really found that voice, like in the Kevin's birthday episode, or the Plan 9 parody, or the unemployment episodes, or when Kevin tries to seduce the strange girl at school. I think those episodes really, I think, hit the mark on it has comedy as well as kind of a heart and good moments for these characters to change as people. It's almost as if it started on episode 8 to 13 and the first 5 didn't happen.
Well, the thing is, like you said, it got canceled basically after 2 episodes, or got moved. They did the first 2 episodes, and they moved it to the July airing, and then it dropped completely. They didn't even bother with like the last 3. So it really was not given a chance at all to make any impact whatsoever.
And again, that's the structure of how television is marketed and managed and all that.
Well,
so
especially for that time,
Oh, especially
Well,
that time. Well, even now,
Yeah, it
it's
definitely
like
suffered from the fact that it's not a kids show, so they didn't have any idea what to do with it.
Well, I mean,
Well,
there's a lot
to
of
be
successful
fair,
non-ones.
they were trying to do that stuff. Like they were doing a
They
bunch
were
of non-kid shows. Look at
they were, but
Oblongs and all these other ones. That
and
wasn't
how
the
many?
issue.
Once again, though, you talk about how many of them actually survived. They didn't know what to do with any of these.
Well,
things.
how many animated sitcoms period survive? Not very many. Like the whole sitcom-y animation
Yeah,
thing
it
does
was
not succeed hardly ever. It's like
But at
Unless
least
you're on
with, like,
Fox.
at least with like the stuff like Futurama, The Simpsons, they're kids shows. So at worst, you put them in this.
Well, Futurama didn't.
They do well.
Futurama did well,
Like-
but even that ended up getting punted for a while until it did
Yeah.
super great on Adult Swim again, and then, well, that didn't turn out super great when they brought it back. But I mean,
Fox. I mean, it had Futurama did pretty well. I mean, it did.
oh yeah, that's right. It got
5
canceled
broadcast
entirely
seasons.
because of Fox being Fox.
Yeah,
Fox.
like it was Fox doing dumb things. But
Well,
still,
it also
four
was-
production seasons, 5 broadcast seasons. That's not terrible.
No, it's not at all.
I mean,
That's
that's pretty
impressive.
good.
I mean, if that was all there
It's
was,
just not
that'd be great.
Simpsons level.
But it also
Unfortunately,
had
we look
that
at some of the
Simpsons
shit from
pedigree.
Simpsons.
The Simpsons pedigree
Yes.
behind it gave them a lot more breathing room
Yes.
because it's like, oh, it's from the mind of Matt Groening, and that was able to give them like, oh, it might not. Let's say if it didn't start off all that good in terms of ratings, by having the kind of marketing behind it of, oh, it's related to the Simpsons in some way, that gives them more leeway. This one also
Yeah.
on a network like the WB. That's
Yeah.
not going to happen. I mean,
Has-
even the relationship of having written on The Simpsons was not enough. The Critic also,
Nope.
which was a
Yeah.
Simpsons showrunner created show on another network. I mean, that one got kicked off after one season and then moved over to Fox, which is again very rare for an animated sitcom to be able to move networks. Period. That's very rare. I think it's either that and Futurama are the only ones I could think of that moved active production from one network to the other.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's a victim of a lot of things, but I think
Yeah.
in terms of the way television is just overall structured and what is the assembly line process of what is decided that passes the quote unquote quality test, I think it suffered from having that ambition of we designed 10 seasons outline of character development in our heads before the first episode even airs. Like it's great that you have that thought process. I think it's might be really valuable to kind of give a sense of characters going somewhere rather than having to really stick with returning everything to the status quo every episode. But at the same time, you better be confident that people are going to be on board with watching that character's journey from the first episode on.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, the networks are going to just drop you, and you'll never have gotten the chance. So I
Well,
applaud.
'cause that kind of thing, it's just crazy. I mean, they don't even do that. They don't even do that for non-animated, like regular broadcast TV. Because the thing that comes to my mind is Babylon 5 had five seasons written out. 4 or 5, one of the two, because Straczynski knew exactly where he wanted to go, and he had to go to every television network with it because they looked at this and said, "We're not doing non-episodic.
Yeah.
We don't want a show that we have to support for this long because if we sign this and it bombs, we're stuck." So even trying that with animation itself is just kind of mind-blowing that they went for it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it didn't go. But I guess the fact that they were at least even able to do the episodes that they did is kind of amazing.
Well, let's think about the opposite of that case. Like, how many seasons did Lost run?
Oh my god!
I mean, and that's a show where I think people had. I honestly don't think they knew exactly. I think they wrote themselves into corners constantly with that show.
They said they had it planned out, but the way
No,
that
they
show
didn't.
turned out, there's no way they did.
Well,
No.
that happens all the time with you perennially. I know we're going a bit off of animation here, but it's actually an important thing to discuss. Like,
Well, it's all-
you
it's
see that often
storytelling. It's important.
on U.S. television. You always have these popular shows that have some sort of weird sci-fi or fantasy plot that it's so crazy mystery things, and then it ends up getting like everybody gets burned and disappointed on it. I mean, you had it with like Heroes and whatnot, where everybody was super excited for that for like a couple of seasons, and it's like, oh, this got shit, and then just who cares?
Yeah.
I mean,
pretty
that
much.
happens all the time, where it's just like
well, and I think even the writing staffs, people forget that you will burn out on this stuff. I mean, you can't just go forever.
Well, I mean,
Everybody burns out.
well, I don't. Well, that's if you bring up enough varied thing and have some sort of direction. I mean, obviously, with those type of things, the best thing to compare them to is stuff like comics. Where you have all these small little arcs and you have all these different writers and artists being brought on. But then again, even with comics, and you have the idea that the level of quality and the actual overarching plot line, it's like schizophrenic and start and stop, and it's just
yeah.
It's like trying to follow the chronology of any given character within like any comic. It's just like, what is going on here? Oh, what? I mean, and that's kind of a similar sort of thing, I suppose. But I mean,
Yeah.
nah.
Well, so do any of you have like particular episodes that kind of stood out as your favorites, or the worst episodes? Let's start with Zorak then.
Uh,
Andy, time now.
um,
No pressure.
I mean, there's like you were saying, a lot of the really later episodes were interesting, like the ones with Andy trying to get his job after the unemployment, and also the one with the Plan 9 ripoff. That was interesting, I thought. One of the it wasn't a great episode, but an interesting moment early on that really made me laugh, and I just want to share it just because I thought it was kind of an interesting sort of feel. Was the joke in like the second episode, I believe, where the whole PTA thing. The joke where he goes into the one teacher's room and it's just like, do you even want to hear this shit? And like, not really. And they just drink. And it's like, wish more parents were like you. That joke was actually probably, I think, my favorite joke in the entire series. It's because it's just very fitting. It's like it just made sense. It felt more real, even though that would never happen. It felt more real in sensibility than like a lot of the sort of depiction of like parent-teacher interactions. I don't know. It's a joke that I enjoyed.
Well, that also reminds me of the one where what is it? The word douchebag is written out in like really pretty cursive.
Yes.
Like that was so good, and the way the characters
Yes.
reacted to it was so organic and funny. That's what like, the small little moments like that are amazing. And God, I mean, all of the Tom Kenny characters that show up in this. I mean, Tom Kenny's voice just shows up all the time. I mean, not only is he Wally, the one one of the main characters, but he shows up a lot. And actually, you hear before SpongeBob even was a thing, you kind of hear the proto SpongeBob voice. I think at the comic convention where he plays one of the little people that played an Ewok. If you listen to it, that's literally the voice that he ended up using for SpongeBob.
Yeah, that was interesting.
And it's like, it's like, oh, we would sing and we would laugh, and then Mr. Lucas would blow the whistle, signaling for us to stop. Like it was. There's all these really small little jokes. I mean, even if the overall episode just wasn't that good, there was at least one or two really good lines. Any episodes that you thought were just really bad, like you just didn't like at all?
I don't know if there was any that I outright hated, but there were some that just really, some were kind of like chores getting through it. Because, okay, to be honest to folks, like the first time I actually watched through the entirety of Mission Hill was actually in preparation for doing this podcast, because I'd caught some of it on TV and it just kind of has been like, oh, this is kind of painful to watch. So I never really stuck with it, other than just the whole thing with Adult Swim where you just kind of watch stuff because it was on when the teen years, basically. So there was a few that were. Actually, I just remembered an episode I actually really liked, just because I found it hilarious, with the Kevin versus the SAT one.
Oh yes, the
As someone who does a lot of mathematical modeling and stuff, I found that interesting from a statistic standpoint. But also, I just found it just an interesting episode, that one.
That really encapsulated the college craze.
That still goes on to some degree.
Oh, it still goes on now.
It's a whole school's obsession with getting people ready for SATs and their own internal scoring, that kind of thing. But then it gets pushed on to the students that who now are obsessed with getting to colleges and whatnot. I found that interesting. I don't know. Like, I didn't really care for the whole. I don't know, just some of the plot lines more, like, because they have like the different A and B plots. They kept that kind of thing that you have in The Simpsons, and usually one of the plot lines is interesting enough that it's hard to be too annoyed with an episode as a whole. But I didn't care for like some of the obsession with just the whole Andy trying to get a new fuck buddy type stuff. Like, I mean, it feels like such a boring kind of like plot. Like, it's just like, oh. Like, I know how it's going to go exactly from every beat to beat, and it's just kind of like, that's great. It's like I can relate to wanting to have a fuck, but it's like, okay, sure. Okay.
Yeah, like I said, it's a really easy B plot for them, and that's
Well, it's usually the A plot too, and it's just kind of
Well,
like
it feels
you have
it,
this.
it feels lazy. It's
You
a
have this
well-run
two of them are the
for-
A plot, two
yeah.
of them are the B plot, and they're just real lazy. Like once or twice, okay, maybe if we'd had one A plot with it to put down the character, and then one B plot where it's, oh look, he's still doing that thing. Meanwhile, back to Posey, you'd be okay. But the fact that it happens so often, you're just like, okay.
I think that's the most uninteresting episode for that. Like a lot of interesting stuff in it, but the actual that plot was really dumb. Was the one where Andy and Kevin were both lusting after George's sister. That was just a really just kind of just like episode. Ugh.
I think the least favorite for me is the one where I think it is one of the later ones, but it's when it involves like a celebrity coming in, and then there's this like
Becca
undefined
Michelle Butterfield.
Yeah, and I really kind of hated
one of the
that
later
one
ones
because it felt like it invaded that world a little bit. I think
it was
too global. It was too
yeah.
silly. It felt unreal. It felt like a latter day Simpsons thing where something very
Lady
large
Gaga
has to
showing
happen.
up. What?
Yeah, and I feel like the stories that are about small things going on in their lives and in that little area of the city they live in, I found that much more interesting. This thing trying to make it kind of a larger thing and having them go to the Grammys and all these celebrities. And
it felt like a plot, like you said, either from The Simpsons or like Friends or something, where it's like, oh, look at this wacky situation we've been stuck in. Andy's got himself a date with a movie star, but maybe he's actually in love with his coworker from the waterbed place. Wah wah, and it's like, oh my god.
Yeah, that one just really fell flat for me. I mean, in terms of character, so in terms of humor, though, I think one of my favorites is the. That's a hard one.
See, you're stuck doing it too. No judging me.
Again, okay, so in terms of character moments, I think the series could actually end, I think, on episode 12 with Kevin's birthday, where the brothers kind of reconcile, and Kevin has to get over the fact that his world has changed now. The home he left is gone, and he's not going to be coddled anymore, and things like that. I mean, that's actually a pretty good episode for the series to end on in terms of those two brothers. But I think the emotions in the Plan 9 episode are really, really strong.
I think, honestly, Plan 9 should have aired earlier.
Yes, because that one doesn't require certain things to happen.
No, it doesn't, and it gives us more backstory for characters that we honestly have seen a ton. I think Plan 9 should have happened somewhere closer to the Real World episode.
Oh yeah. Oh,
because
in terms of humor, I love the Real World episode because
that one's so dated.
I love them because of their backstory.
I like it because they're so good at nailing that shit.
Oh, it caught it exactly, but it is so dated just watching it now. It's like, oh man. But yeah, the Plan 9 one. I wonder if they put the Plan 9 one early. I wonder if they put it deliberately far back so they would be less, like, oh, it's a show about the gay couple, where it's not really their selling point. Or they were worried that it was going to cause some sort of backlash. I don't know.
I think it just sort of fell in there.
It might have been a distraction from the characters and their development. Because again, those guys aren't the main characters, and they wanted to maybe spend time establishing the main cast and then slowly kind of gravitate outwards. I mean, they have also the other neighbors with the baby and the snake and things like that. Yeah. I mean, I think all these shows often will spend a lot of time in the first few episodes defining the main cast, and then once that feels kind of secure, these shows kind of start expanding outwards. Like you start looking into episodes based around the sub-characters.
Yeah.
Like maybe Kevin's friends specifically, rather than being kind of incidental to, like, they might have conflict with Kevin, but none of the episodes hinge on the other two.
Yeah. Well, and as you said, they had just done Kevin and his brother finally coming to terms with each other. So the next episode can step away from them for a moment because we know that they're okay. We can now start looking at these other characters to be like, what are they doing? What's going on? And start getting more backstory than what we've really gotten. So it is a logical place for the show to start to like expand. We just weren't given the chance. So if inside of just it only being a 13-episode show, move it up so that you get to it and you end on that. The brothers are going to be okay. Things will work out plot line. And you have that earlier where you're like, oh, we've learned some interesting things about another pair of the characters.
Yeah. But I think overall there's a valuable thing to look at in terms of the show, in terms of like character writing. It has lots of flaws. It's not a perfect show, but I think I like the fact that it has a visual style that I haven't seen return in a long time. I haven't seen anybody kind of really ape that. Although I think some of the Cartoon Network shows are kind of almost a graduation from it. Like you still see certain things of the way the characters are constructed, the thick lines for some of the characters, kind of creative color choices. If you look at things like Steven Universe, the way the color is very expressionistic. It's not realistic color. It's limited palettes. It's you get the sense of time and location and things like that, but it's not photorealistic color choices.
I think that's kind
So
of like a similar inspiration in like kind of the source styling. I would say they both kind of that sort of indie comic type feel for
Yeah,
inspiration.
exactly. So
Yeah.
I think there is kind of you see a little bit of that now, but nothing as I think audaciously, you know, ugly beautiful. I mean, I think that's kind of what you'd kind of call this series, and that it takes a lot of artistry to pull this type of style off, and yet there's an ugliness that has an appeal to it. And that's what I think applaud the show for. Plus, I'm a sucker for good character writing, and I really wish that more animated sitcoms had good character writing and writing about characters with motivations that make sense. That also those motivations aren't just for that one episode.
Well,
Like a lot of these shows will just like this character will suddenly have a dream for this maybe one episode and then it's never addressed again. It's nice to have like a long-term problem that the character's getting over. Like Kevin's obsession with getting into Yale, it guides a lot of his personality, and it's kind of consistent.
well, that's kind of the issue with sitcoms in general. Like the sitcom is really kind of focused on the static nature of the storyline. I mean, that's kind of what makes a sitcom these days. Is like you have very static characters in a very static situation, but then you introduce these dynamic situations that define kind of the situations of the sitcom. So, I mean, it is interesting that they trying to do dynamic changes over time kind of goes against somewhat the whole sitcom-y thing. So, but I mean, that's interesting and great. It would be great to see more of that. But I mean, you don't see much change or much focus on character changes within even normal sitcoms or even,
Yeah.
in any kind of animated sitcoms. You don't see much of that at all. I mean, Simpsons certainly doesn't have that. Nothing's changed in there for like 20 years at this point. Nothing. I
Well,
mean,
like in modern episodes, like Homer's dream job or dream life is suddenly, it changes from episode to episode. I think, well, yes, there is the fact that some things have to stay constant in any series, but I guess what I'm saying is that there's kind of been this recent rebellion where every episode is so self-contained that the characters are kind of wildly inconsistent with themselves, or at least established personality, just for the sake of we can just pull off this wacky situation or joke, and then once the episode ends, everything just gets reset again. It's hard. There's a delicate balance between okay, you need to have some character consistency, but you need room to grow. But you also need to make sure it's funny, and a lot of people, I think these days, definitely like the idea of characters breaking character is funny in and of itself. It's like this Dadaist thing that is, again, look at Family Guy, for example. None of those characters have set personalities anymore at all. And that's also on the web. I mean, when I look at a lot of these web cartoons, I kind of see that same problem. I don't see that kind of classic sense of character development and some consistency, but with a little bit of leniency to be able to kind of stretch them, but at the same time make them a kind of a sui generis character.
well, I mean, like if you look at something like Bob's Burgers, I mean, Bob's Burgers has lots of character development moments, but can you honestly point to any single arcs that go over all the episodes? Like, see how this
Yeah.
change has morphed? Like, I would find that difficult personally.
Yeah, but again, I'm fine with that. And that, well, I mean, the
I mean, I'm just
characters
saying, it's
fit.
like that. I mean, that's kind of going against like Mission Hill planned to actually do that kind of thing, where you have this broader arc. I mean,
Yeah.
like Bob's Burgers, great show, but I mean, as far as sitcoms go, they don't try to do that anything. I mean, the closest I would say in terms of animated stuff that does have this broad arcing change, though it's not really a sitcom at all, is like say Adventure Time, which is able to get away with
Yeah.
this stuff a lot, and that you have these episode to episode plots for like 15-minute episodes that are like months and months and like years apart. It's like, whoa, how are you able to get away with
regular
this?
Regular shows doing that now too, where there are changes in the characters' relationships and things like that. I think there is kind of a movement, but I mean, even sitcoms have that change. I mean, look at Cheers, and you look at like the transition of characters in and out and additions. I think no sitcom is truly static, especially over a long period of time. But I guess what I'm looking for is a reason to have a character make an action that makes sense to the character, rather than, well, we need someone to make this joke, we'll just throw this person to have them say the joke, even if it makes no sense for that character to say that joke. I guess that's what I'm looking for.
Well, yeah, well, that's the issue with like the Simpsons and like Family Guy, is that they're so focused on this moment-to-moment gag, and the gags aren't usually that good anyways. It's like it doesn't justify it enough. You're betraying your characters and your general themes and focus of the show for cheap gags that aren't worth doing that kind of thing, worth skewing your framework for. I mean, if you can't do a story or interesting stuff with the characters anymore, you got to kill them. You got to kill your babies and move on.
Yes,
Except that it's over.
Writing.
You have done everything you can do with them. Move on. But Simpsons is never going to die.
Well,
Simpsons is going to last for another 50 years.
Yep. Well, until it becomes unprofitable.
Oh, yeah. We'll see when that happens, because Simpsons is probably making more profit now than ever, which is depressing, but there it goes.
Well, so I think we had a good sense of our thoughts of Mission Hill. I mean, again, we only had 13 episodes. There was a lot of, I think, potential within it, but, we're never going to really see what came out of it. But I think what's there is valuable in a way. Whether you think it's good or bad, I think it's a show that there's value in having looked at it, especially if you're interested in writing.
Yeah,
so,
it's definitely worth a watch.
That's something I would check out. Let's see. In other news, I guess, since it's been a while since we had our last one, since I moved from New York to California, let's see. Fox has now dismantled its animation domination lineup. So there isn't going to be American Dad anymore. Cleveland Show got canceled. I think there's only 3 shows that are animated, and they're going to be interspersed with live-action sitcoms now. So it's going to be Bob's Burgers, Simpsons, and Family Guy.
Has there been any rumblings? Like, should we be worried for Bob's Burgers, or is Bob's Burgers doing well enough that we should be like, okay?
It doesn't have the best ratings, so if you really like Bob's Burgers, do what you can. If another DVD set comes out, try picking that up. Except for the fact that the DVD market has kind of cratered. Go walk into a Best Buy and see what is actually new in terms of DVDs for TV shows. You're unfortunately not going to see much. So if you are really into a given show these days, you have to kind of find certain ways of supporting it. Either trying to watch the show when it airs, or...
Well, that only matters if you have a Nielsen box.
Yeah, if you have a Nielsen box. Well, there are some things like if some shows show up on iTunes, or if you have a DVR, for example, there is some kind of metrics that have DVR. I mean, the Nielsen rating system overall, I think, has been this kind of faulty system.
Well, yeah, they should just be actually just using like things like DVD and cable boxes, because they're everywhere. Just monitoring that sort of data.
Well, and also,
that'd be a
like,
little invasive too, though.
Yeah, and you can't monitor attentiveness of the audience and things like that.
Sure.
I mean, DVD sales.
They can't even tell if the TV's on too with those boxes.
Oh yeah, and again, what the nice thing about DVD sales is it shows that the people like it enough to invest in it, and there's again the differentiation in viewers. So there's alpha viewers. There are people who leave what some sociologists have called, or media study theorists call, love marks, as in an attachment or little signals that show an attachment to a show. That means that, okay, they're dedicated towards it. We can invest in it, and we have someone who will keep following us for a long time. So they're more likely, the type of person who's more likely to buy a DVD versus someone who just might watch it on TV a little bit and won't end up buying any other products related to it. So there's kind of like a lot of that.
This is going to sound terrible and cynical, but another thing you can do, and it is actually being paid attention to, Twitter.
Yes.
Does actually work. talking about like something like Bob's Burger, tweeting that this episode was really good and attaching it to the Fox Twitter account. They actually do pay attention to that. It's not a large percentage of their vision, but the more they see discussed on there, the more likely they are to go, well, we're hitting this demographic. Do we want to focus in on that?
Oh, that's interesting.
It's just the way that that kind of media stuff it's becoming so pervasive, especially inside of marketing, that it does these days. It sounds stupid, but it does affect how they do their ideas on television shows. Word of mouth is easier than ever for them to see what's going on with it, and they will watch it.
Exactly. And again, using Twitter and social networking to promote that shows the dedication of the audience. Again, it's what can you do that shows the people that you are invested in the show, because the more their calculus is the more invested someone is, the more likely they're going to be watching the ads around it, or as ad revenue is becoming less reliable because people can now skip ads or mute or things like that, buying ancillary products. I mean, the whole vertical integration and synergy thing is big with a lot of these companies. So being able to buy ancillary, Spencer's Gifts crap, related to these shows, that's a big market thing for them.
Buy all the Bob's Burgers towels.
Yes, exactly. Oh man, I can't believe it. That's the product that came into my head. It's a Bob's Burgers beach towel. I mean, like, have you ever walked into a Spencer's Gifts? It's like they have like Family Guy shot glasses and just Family Guy wall clocks and all this terrible shit. And it's like that's a big aspect of the way these TV shows they have to make money now.
I know it's slightly going off topic, but I always find it interesting how like Spencer's and whatnot, they're so slow to the pickup of these things. When they get to a merchandising, it's always like 2 years after the fact. What's up with that?
Well, like fans are often
their
much
merchandising.
faster.
Yeah, their merchandising stuff is it's this weird slow machine that. A lot of this stuff is designed at the time the show is around, but it takes them so long to design, plan, go through all the effort of deciding what the best way to do like a shot glass, what should be on there, how it looks, test this with people. By the time this all gets through, because they're still using more of the old-fashioned ways to do this, it can take 2.5, 3 years. Spencer's gets it. Maybe that show only lasted for a season, or maybe it's a character that got shot in the head. I mean, you don't know.
Well,
I think it's actually even more basic than that. I think the way a lot of these shows, who owns the rights to these characters' images, who
that also
all the legal agreements that you have to figure out of who's going to distribute your product, who's going to produce this product. It's not quality assurance or consistency or anything by that means. It's not about like, oh, is this character dead now? Like that I don't think enters the equation at all. I think it is, who do we have previous agreements with? Who owns the rights to these characters' images, either the show itself or the network, etc. There's big legal stuff around there, and also just finding
some of it,
the audience.
Though while they say that, some of that is straight out the money too. How much is the rights worth?
Yeah.
How much profit can they make off of this thing?
Yeah,
and that also does hit pretty hard.
And I suppose it's also them being slow to pick up on what is the hip new things. Like, it's interesting. Like, they just started like selling like Homestuck merchandise, and it's like the popularity for that peaked like a couple years ago. Like, it's not really rising that much anymore. I think they haven't even made new comics for that in like a year and a half, 2 years. So it's like, okay, you're a little behind the game there.
Well, they've always been behind in that regard. It's not like we're Japan, where the
direct pairing,
and
where they have the focus on merchandising.
The TV show is already 6 episodes in or something, and you can buy the main character as a Figma or fuck doll or drink coaster.
Yeah, where that's the actual point of the show. It's like, we know everybody's going to pirate this, but it's so long as they buy all of our fuck dolls, it'll be okay.
Yeah, and then that's already a thought of ahead of time. America, we think of it as an afterthought. Like, again, and fans these days especially are much faster. Like, if you look at a lot of these T-shirt websites and things like that, you'll have fans having. I mean, before Cartoon Network even made the first Adventure Time or regular show T-shirts that are officially designed by the network, nerd or geek or fan kind of based clothing and accessory communities were already making.
Well, yeah, they had the hat after the pilot
stuff.
was even made. It's like the pilot exists, and everybody's like, "Well, I need to get me a Finn hat or whatever his name was in the pilot."
Yeah, and that's exactly it. So I think the networks these days, they're slowly catching up. But I think there is that delay. I think there's also a cautiousness where
Well,
the
yeah,
networks
the
don't
network's
want to
always
invest in
afraid of
something if they
change
don't
and
think.
investment. Yeah.
Well, they don't know whether or not they're going to stick with the show at all. So why spend all the marketing money and the research money into seeing who may or may not buy this, and then finding the right producer for the content and getting all the legal stuff for the rights and finding out where to distribute it or how to distribute. I mean, there's all sorts of logistics aside that if they aren't really that secure in the show, it's in the middle of the first season or something like that, and it might have been successful. Well, they haven't hit the ground running yet with that product line, and it might take the third season when they go, okay, yeah, this show at least has enough cultural capital to support our investment, and that's I think where a lot of that comes in, is that the networks don't want to bother doing that investment, and they're willing to be on the court a little bit later. The fans will have a head start, but the networks are fine with taking a little bit longer, being second on the scene.
Sure.
But again, it's not the same model as Japan. They're the product
Japan,
licensing.
yeah, Japan's
they're the
market's
product
weird.
licensing kings. Like that's kind of that's their whole bag from early on to through now.
Horrifying.
In both good and bad ways. Okay, I'm saying in terms of finance and the way these shows are produced and how they're able to produce as much animation as they do. It's thanks to that cottage industry around selling plastic crap based on the shows that they make, good or bad. So we'll see what happens with that. Let's see. The new anime season is coming out, so we have this big post written by Zorak, of course. Very slow season.
Yeah, I don't know. Do we even want to do an
good
episode
ones.
on this one?
No, I'm not going to. So we're just going to talk a little bit about it here while we have the chance.
I'm just going to real quick touch on what's actually looking good or interesting.
Yes,
so Space Dandy is continuing this July, which is really good. Even if you're not into anime, it's on Adult Swim. Watch it.
Please watch it.
It is super interesting. It's this weird, episodic interestingness with just like artists just having fun. It's great.
Yes.
And we should be getting an episode of that by Masaki Yuasa, hopefully. And speaking of Yuasa, we have very soon, I believe next
12th,
week. Yep.
On the 12th, Thursday,
this week,
the new episode of Adventure Time. Well, at least by the people listening to it, it would be June 12th, 2014. That is when the episode is going to be airing. A lot of people are really excited about it. I would love to see Cartoon Network just give Yuasa a show. I mean, that would be kind of fun. But I would like to see people support both Space Dandy and this type of thing. This type of experimentation is kind of almost unheard of in television. Space Dandy also being partly funded by a U.S. network, for example. So,
we had that happen previously with The Big O. Also
The Big O
got a
and
second season.
kind of Cowboy Bebop as well, right?
Well, no, Cowboy Bebop came out in the U.S. way after it aired. So, I mean, its popularity, I think, drove the reason why we got Samurai Champloo. Was because, Bebop was really popular in the U.S., so we can make something that might not be hugely popular in Japan, but if there's a U.S. market, we could make a return, that kind of thinking. And that could probably, I think, help contribute to the Champloo being made. But speaking of that, so Shinshiro Watanabe, who is also the chief director of Space Dandy, and of course to direct Cowboy Bebop, also has another show this season called, in Japanese, Zankyo no Terror, or they've translated both as Terror in Resonance or Terror in Tokyo, and I have no fucking clue what it's about. I have a summary in front of me, and it's the summary. Every summary I've read is basically incoherent. But I don't know, some sort of action character drama / suspense
conspiracy mystery thing.
Yeah, and we have no idea what it's about. But the director is Watanabe, and he's really good. And Yoko Kanno, who did the Bebop music, is also back. So that's probably going to be worth watching, or at least buying a soundtrack.
Yeah, and also the preview they made for it, it looks nice.
It looks interesting.
It has a good style to it.
I hope it's not incoherent and just dumb and just like super.
Well,
anime.
we don't want another Captain Earth on our hands, essentially.
Yeah, I just don't want another just really incoherent plot that I don't care about. You see those so often in anime, where it's just like, this is so fucking anime. I have no fucking clue what's going on. Things are just happening because they just made these character writings and they just didn't bother stopping and thinking, wait, does this make any sense? That's really all I'm looking forward to this season. There's a few.
There's a lot of buzz around the remake of Sailor Moon, which is a big classic for a lot of people growing up as kids. And for people who want to see the classics, you can go to Hulu, and they're putting up 2 episodes of the original series subtitled every Monday. So every Monday you can go down and you'll be able to see original episodes of Sailor Moon on there.
So it's going to take approximately like 4 years to
put it all up. It's going to take a while, but
so somebody remind me in like 2 years when they get to the part where they stopped showing it on Cartoon Network, so I can figure out what the hell's going on with that plot.
Well, you can also buy
a lot of episodes that were never even of the original series.
I refuse to spend money on Sailor Moon.
You could also get it illegally.
Good.
Yeah, and again,
I am an upstanding citizen.
Well, there are plenty of episodes that were in the original early series that were never bothered to be taken.
Just because they were too weird in Japanese.
That's probably one of the reasons why it tends to skip around and isn't all.
Well, there's also a lot of episodes that just aren't very good.
Yeah,
it was not a great show. But it's a classic because I watched it when I was a child.
Well, there's
a lot of really good
things.
That's also the interesting thing with this remake is that there was actually just for some reason just a lot of really good staff on like the original Sailor Moon, like a lot of really good writers and directors that people just still fawn about. You know, the guys who were working currently on Captain Earth, which kind of sucks. But and also
people who ended up doing Utena and all these
really
other
nuts.
Really interesting shows. But the current one. It's a much more bland version. They're trying to make it look more like the comic, but in a very kind of superficial way. Like they're not making good style decisions. So you're seeing a lot of kind of a bit of a blowback. But if you're interested in it, that's going to be coming out this season. But hey, if you want to see the classics, they're making the classic readily available.
I do find it interesting that they're putting up 2 episodes a week while this re-air is going to be airing every other week for some reason.
Yeah,
I was like, why are you even doing that? I don't understand. But that's just an interesting little dichotomy.
Well, they've already put the episodes up, so they're like up to episode maybe 8 already at this point. So you can right now go to Hulu and watch old episodes of Sailor Moon. So that's currently going on if you're interested. But hey, that's good news for people who aren't so happy about the new one.
The only other things, I'm trying to think what other really is worth mentioning. There's some slice of life comedy that are people are looking forward to, things that I'm not necessarily guaranteeing that they're going to be good. Like people have been talking about monthly girl Nozaki. Some people have been going on about that. It's a slice of life comedy about a guy in high school who writes manga for girls, and a girl in his class has a crush on him. And it's supposed to be like a kind of a sort of daily lives of high school boys type sort of feel, like comedic feel, which is good. Which is a really good comedic anime, by the way. So that might be worth watching. But it's with comedic anime, it's so hard to tell without actually watching it if it's going to be any good. You can't predict it. Even if you know the comic, it's just very shit adaptations. The other one that people have been talking about, like excited for, is what was it called?
Oni no Kielbasa.
No. Barakamon, apparently it's called. It seems kind of Yotsuba-esque. It's about a calligrapher who gets exiled to a small island after punching a famous calligrapher. And he's kind of a city boy, so he's learning to deal with knowing and living on a small island with people that are just barging in on his life when he's not used to that kind of thing. And it seems very much like a Yotsuba, which is a very cute comic, that kind of thing. And the director worked on Tokyo Magnitude 8.0, which was fucked up, but interesting. That's basically all I know of that are interesting.
Well, there's in terms of non-anime stuff, there is I think the poster and kind of a trailer for a movie called Song of the Sea, which is from the guy that made The Secret of Kells. if you're familiar with that.
Never heard of it.
Okay, well, it's nice because it's a traditionally animated film with 2D graphics. It's not in CG, so it's something that a lot of people are very excited for. The plot is it follows like the last Selkie.
Oh, yes, Selkies. I know Selkies.
Yes,
I know them well.
So, well, he has a very the director. I think Tom Moore, I think is his name, has a lot of interest in that kind of Ireland folklore and things like that.
I love mythology.
So if you're interested in that type of stuff, you have The Secret of the Kells, which came out, 2010, 2008 or something, sometime around then. And now there's a new one called Song of the Sea that's coming out. I think it was at Cannes Film Festival, but I'm not sure when it's going to come out in the U.S. exactly. But I think because it just got announced, I think that it's going to be distributed in the U.S. So you can look that up online, find a trailer or at least some info about that. So that's something some people are really excited for, just because, holy crap, a traditionally animated movie out in theaters. That's not very common right now.
Oh, I just remembered a couple of anime things I want to real quick mention.
Okay.
So there's one thing that we won't be seeing for a while, but this summer we do have the new Lupin the Third movie coming out. That's based along that whole separate series that they made last year, The Woman Called Fujiko Mine, where it was the animation director was Takeshi Koike, who previously did Redline, and was really interesting and stylistic and just full of owls and tits. And this is just a movie
and hatch marks and
really weird imagery
and rough charcoal lines
and a cool soundtrack. But it was really interesting, and they're making a film for that that's called Daisuke Jigen's Gravestone, which is looking like it may be interesting. And the other interesting thing is, movie-wise, that's coming out this summer from the anime side that we won't see probably until like this time next year is there's another Kenko Roll movie. And I don't know if anybody here is familiar with that, but basically Kenko Roll was an animated movie, animated entirely by one. I think it was. I don't know if it was a college student or just a guy who came out of it who just basically animated an entire film that looked really nice, actually.
Oh wow!
I believe he did it entirely. He hand wrote it. It was only like a 30-minute thing, but it was really impressive.
It's like the guy that did Voices of a Distant Star. He just did that all in his PowerPC Mac G3 or something.
Right. Yeah.
Way back, and now he does God, what was it? What he did something meters per second or something like that.
Yeah.
Makoto Shinkai. He started out doing I made my own film entirely by myself, and it's like a 30-minute film. So
yeah. So this guy made this film back in like 2009, and it was really interesting just for one guy creating this thing. And he's got a new one coming out. I don't know if that's actually set for coming out this summer. It supposedly is, and some people are fairly excited about that. It's worth checking out the original because it's just 30 minutes, and it's interesting from the standpoint of it being a guy's prolonged art film that he made over some years. So that's it for anime. It's kind of a bad season. There's a lot of nothing.
Yep.
It's a summer.
I mean, the only other news I could think of would be kind of Kickstarter-y campaigns that are kind of controversial, but I'm not sure if I want to talk about them here. But, if you're interested in looking at that stuff, there is some Kickstarters going to adapt some internet popular ideas.
Screw that! Don't even back those. Back the Reading Rainbow Kickstarter instead.
Yeah, or something.
Give the money to Geordie LaForge so he can read books to children.
Yes, it's much more interesting
or,
and worthwhile.
If you are going to if you do want to fund someone's Kickstarter to produce animation, do some background research into the people behind it before you do that, please. I think that is the overall lesson that should be learned from a lot of these things.
Don't make cartoons about webcomics, please.
Or memes. Please don't make a meme series. I'm begging you, everybody who's listening to this, just don't.
Are we eventually
going to say no to memes?
Oh man, are we eventually going to get like a Slender Man animated series?
No, this one's a little bit dumber.
Well, I'm just in a general sense. I wonder if we are ever going to get that.
Maybe. I mean, if Homestuck wasn't made into an animated series, maybe not.
Well, that as much was just Andrew Hussey just being Andrew Hussey. I don't know. I don't know if the guys who actually own Slender Man care enough. One way or the other, I don't know.
Yep. But either way, look before you leap when investing in Kickstarters for these things. Just that's the overall lesson that people should be making. It's great to invest in maybe like a short film, but when it comes to making a series, lots of unexpected problems pop up in production of things like that. So money totals for those, especially for people who have never produced a series before.
Well, that's a inherent risk with Kickstarter
It's inherent
in general.
risk, but
I mean, look at all the video games people have backed on Kickstarter.
The lesson is be smart about Kickstarter and do not be led on by people's enthusiasm for their big ideas, because oftentimes it's easier to plan things than it is to execute.
Well, yeah, and also with development of animated series or even things like video games, it's often troubled, and there's an awful lot of series that were conceived that never came to fruition out there. You know, there's no guarantee that just because you're backing one via Kickstarter that it'll actually exist or be worthwhile or be justified or worth what you even spent. So
yes, and for all you animators out there. And if people are trying to recruit you on these projects before they have their funding, be careful, because a lot of them will promise things like exposure or eventual paychecks or something like that for people who kind of make the materials that is then made into the promo on the Kickstarter, which may or may not be funded. That's tricky work. I mean, I'm of the mind that, hey, you want to create a series and you want to get Kickstarter funding and you need to have some material prepared. That's the risk that a creator has to take financially to invest in it before it's presented. So if someone wants you to make a promo video or character designs or anything for their project on Kickstarter, get paid for that. You should be paid for that thing. It is not up to the public to pay for someone to even get the basis of their idea. They need to invest in it themselves, either make the thing themselves or hire the artist to at least just make that material for promo.
Actually, speaking of Kickstarter with animation, obviously we've talked in the past about some of the Kickstarted anime stuff. I believe we mentioned, Kick Heart by Masaki Yuasa, which was really
Little
great.
Witch and Little Witch Academia.
Yeah. So the interesting thing I want to mention was just with Yuasa is that it's not anything related to that. I mean, in the sense that basically he made the comment recently that. That doing well, like the Kickstarter for that doing really well, actually like really kind of like gave him like an emotional turnaround. Like it made him much more optimistic in things about it. Kind of had like it's why we're seeing so much production out of him as of late. That it's kind of just basically he's been inspired by it. So that's great.
Yes,
because we've been seeing him all over the place. Because I guess he was kind of down on he's been having a lot of projects that weren't doing super well for a while, and then now he's just been exploding everywhere, and it's great. And
yes.
The other interesting thing is that with Little Witch Academia, who was the director on that again? Do you remember? It was
I think it's Hiroyuki. No, it's not Imaishi. It is
it's Yoshinari. That's right, Yoshinari.
Yoshinari.
Yeah. For people who were too into the Kill la Kill stuff and some of the other stuff that Trigger have been making, which are some controversial stuff. Yoshinari recently in an interview made a comment along the lines like, "Oh no, my sensibilities are very different from theirs, and I'm planning on making a work that is to my liking. They're a bunch of perverted old guys, and then I'm going to sit over here doing my thing." So it's a studio that allows the directors to do their sort of thing. So there was some concern that after Kill la Kill was Kill la Kill, that Little Witch would end up getting kind of weird. And it's like, nah, Yoshinari is going to continue doing his style of works, and it's not necessarily going to be at all like Imaishi's style. So that's good.
Yeah, he'll make sure to class up the joint.
Yeah, I mean, and I appreciate the fact that Trigger does allow their directors to be a bit more wild, even if the result sometimes is a bit regrettable. So
they're willing to take some risk, I guess.
Yeah.
is one way of putting it. So that looks like we've wrapped up a good amount of the news going on right now. So I guess we should probably sign off. This has been Neeksy, also known as R.Y. Magnuson.
This is Zorak.
And
I'm Tears. You can find me on Twitter at TearsHTML.
Well, and definitely thank you for joining us. I think it was really nice
problem.
to have a third person who is very familiar with the series to talk to. So thank you very much for being on with us. And
I have a feeling you'll eventually run into a couple other things, so I'll be back at some
I'm
point.
sure we'll.
definitely,
I will be back at some point.
Definitely, we hope so. We do have some in the future that I think you would definitely like. So we have some in the pipeline that we'll definitely ask you for. So
Yeah, I've had a good time.
Next
Definitely,
time,
well-
though, next time I think we were talking about doing, or do we actually want to do the one that we were previously talking about doing?
the one that we're doing the watching for right now.
Yeah. Is that what we're going to do next, or are we going to stick something else?
Well, yeah. So we're gonna go back to Japan next time. I guess maybe a little bit of a teaser.
Oh, well, I think we
it
can
is-
just say what it is so people can watch it before.
Okay, yeah, they could pre-watch it.
Yeah.
The director is the man behind Evangelion, and this was a series he made back in I think 1989, 1990, which was called Secret of Blue Water Nadia. And we'll leave it to you to figure out why we picked it. In a lot of ways,
It's an interesting work that had some repercussions, and it's a complicated work. So, yeah, just give it a watch. You can find it.
Look
online.
it up online. You'll find it somewhere.
You can't buy it. I believe at the moment
it doesn't exist in U.S. format.
you
right
can
now.
find it on some sort of illicit.
You'll find it somewhere. Although there has been a recent controversy. I think someone pointed out how Disney's Atlantis.
That
film,
rumbling's been around for ages.
Yeah, there are some very very interesting similarities. So, but that's what we're hoping to plan on talking about next time. I'm hoping to get more episodes out more frequently now that my move from New York has ended. So you'll be hearing a lot more from everyone here. And if you guys have questions, suggestions, or anything else, hit either one of us up on Twitter at either at @RYMagnuson or at SA Zorak. So we'll be able to respond to you there, and maybe we'll be able to talk about stuff in the next episode. So thank you for being with us. Have a animated day. That was terrible. So I'll come up with something better. Sorry. Bye!